Okay, so the first thing you're going to see me do is we're going to loosen a couple of ring clips. Now these ring clips are what holds the air boot from the air intake to the carburetor. This is what they look like, and you can see at the top there they're just held together with a simple screw, flat-headed screw, and that's used to clamp down on the carb and on the airbox. So you just want to find the head of those screws, loosen them, and then we'll be able to remove that rubber boot and get it out of the way so it's not causing any restrictions when we're working on these carbs. You'll find one at the front there, and you'll find one at the airbox, which is that big chunk of plastic underneath the screwdriver there. Very simple process. Loosen them up and remove it. Now that we've loosened them up, we can very slowly pry off the rubber boot. You want to be careful when you're doing this. You don't want to go yanking it. If it's not coming free easily, try loosening these ring clips a little bit more. You don't want to crack them, split them, or anything like that, otherwise you'll have to replace them. Same process for the front carburetor. You can see this one a little bit easier. You've got that air box right at the front there, that big hunk of plastic, and then you've got a screw to the side here on mine. Undo that ring clip, and then you've got another ring clip on the top of the carburetor there that we need to loosen up as well. Now bear in mind the location of these screws on your bike might be slightly different. Whoever's been messing with it or changing things might have put the ring clips in a different orientation. Very slowly remove the boot as we did the first one. Just like that. Now bear in mind you want to inspect these boots when you've got them off. You want to check them for splits and hairline fractures. They should be soft and squishy. If they are rock solid and rigid, they need to be replaced. Because even if there's no fractures or splits in them right now, chances are they will develop them over time due to the vibrations caused by the bike. And if you've got more air going into the carbs than you're supposed to, the engine will not run the way it's supposed to. You'll get over revving and backfiring. So now we can work on the opposing side of the carburetors to release them from the cylinders themselves. Same process. I got a ring clip on the rear and I got a ring clip on the front carburetor. These are going straight into the air intake on the cylinders. Find those heads of those screws and loosen them up. Once we've loosened them up completely, we'll be able to slowly maneuver the carburetors off of the cylinders. But we don't want to just go pulling the carburetors off when these are done, because there are going to be some other things that we need to take into account. So right now what I'm doing is I'm locating which wires are going from the front carb to the rear carb and are going under the frame to get there. You don't want to just pull the carbs up, because as you can see here there's a whole heap of things going on, and some of these wires go underneath that center bracket. So in order to get the carbs out, we need to release those wires, those pipes, everything that is kind of crisscrossing around the engine. For my bike, I have to take note of the choke cable coming from the front carburetor and the throttle cable coming down from the front carburetor. Both of these lines are going underneath that center frame that you can see there with the two screw lugs in it. That brass nipple you can see at the back, that's the top of the throttle cable. You'll be able to get a couple of spanners in here and release it from where I'm stood on that side, on the right hand side. This can be fiddly, and sometimes you have to modify one of your spanners to get in there. Now, as you can see, this throttle cable is not in good condition. The braiding is coming away from the sheath and the whole thing needs to be replaced. So to save myself time, because I'm going to have to fit a new cable anyway, I'm just going to grab a set of snips and I'm going to cut that wire to get that carburetor free. The other thing you might want to start taking note of is you can see that piece of conduit on the left hand side of the frame. That's the fuel line that connects the two carburetors together. Now you don't have to remove this if it's going over the top of the frame, but if you do, that's what it is. Keep that piece of pipe in good nick, because you're going to need it when you reinstall the pipes. So the other thing I need to check is the fuel supply to that rear carb. It's the rear carb that takes the fuel from the tank and passes it up to the front carburetor. So as you can see, we've got a metal clip there at the top of the pipe. We need to release that clip and then push down on that pipe to remove it from the bottom of the carburetor. Can be fiddly, especially if you've got a rat's nest of wires in the way like I do. We just apply a little bit of pressure once that clip's been released, and the pipe will come off, and the carburettor should just pop out of its spot. Like so. That brass nipple you can see there, that's the fuel intake. Now the last piece of this jigsaw puzzle on the rear carburettor for me is the choke, which is this 12mm plastic nut. That plastic nut you can see at the top left of the carburettor, that's the choke. Now inside that you've got a spring and you've got a needle. You want to make sure that when you're taking this choke nut out that you don't let anything go flying all over the place. Do it very slowly, and as you can see we've got a spring in there and we've got a needle in there. This needle will fall off, it's not permanent, so you want to be careful. You can slide it off yourself, off of the choke cable, and you can also take the spring off of that cable and the housing for it. Don't worry about how to put everything back together yet, there will be another video showing you how to put everything back together. Just be sure to keep these pieces safe, you don't want to be losing these. A cable going under the frame which is actually connecting the two carbs with a short cable, and that's the sync cable. The sync cable's job is to get both carburetors to allow the same amount of air and fuel mixture into the cylinders at exactly the same time and at exactly the same amount of pressure. That's why we have a sync cable. If we don't sync the carbs, the engine's going to run really bad. Now if you can get the carburetors out without touching that sync cable, without loosening anything, then do your best to do that. As soon as you start messing with the tension of that sync cable, you're going to have to resync the cables, which involves potentially taking it to a professional to be sunk. This right here is the throttle cable that's coming down from the handlebars. We can release the tension on this, remove that metal ball bearing on the end from the throttle arm, and then continue to unscrew the throttle cable from the carburettor, which will allow us to take the carbs to the workbench. Take your time with this. If things don't come free easily, don't force them because they will shear. They're only soft metal. Get yourself some WD-40, spray it on, leave it to soak for half an hour, spray it again, give it another half an hour and come back to it. Now we've released some tension there in the throttle arm, we can work on getting that ball bearing out of the throttle arm. You want to use some long nose needle pliers if you can at this point. It can be really quite hard on the fingers to get this throttle cable out because you have to hold that arm up, which has a lot of tension in it because it's sprung loaded. I'm going to use the snips that I used earlier to remove it. Obviously don't do this because you'll kink the throttle cable and you'll need to replace it. But there we go. You can see it just pops out of its slot there. So we're just going to finish off this process. We're going to take the throttle cable completely out of the carburettor. As you can see, that's the fuel pipe that I mentioned earlier that connects the two carburetors together. That there is the sync cable that I mentioned as well. If you can get the carbs out without touching that, that'd be a good idea to do that. The last step is to remove the front choke, and this is a bit more simple than the first one. We just pull on the cable itself and that removes it from the choke arm. Rotate the cable itself and it just pops straight out. And that's it. Both of the carburetors are now free and we can put them on the workbench ready to be stripped down, cleaned and rebuilt.